we're good. All right, I'm Johnny, and I'm here with Nicolas Hulscher. He's an epidemiologist. We're going to talk about some recent studies, talking about the new mRNA shots. How you doing today, Nicolas?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks for coming. And I was just looking at this study here that came out recently here about turbo cancers. Now, a lot of people have been talking about this for a long time, and what's now we're getting more and more studies showing this. I saw a recent one that showed that people who took the COVID vaccine had about a 40% increased risk of getting cancers. Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah. So now we have two population level studies. So this is the very first two population studies that looked at COVID-19 vaccines and cancer risk both found massive increases in multiple cancers. So literally not there hasn't been one study that looked and found no increase. They all find these increases. So it's about and these two studies, one of them's from Italy, right? One of them followed 300,000 Italians for about 30 months. That was the first one that found about 23% increased risk of overall cancer hospitalizations. And they also found increases about 40 to 60% increases in breast cancer hospitalizations and colorectal cancer, as well as bladder cancer and leukemia and lymphoma. Now we have this new study that just came out that out of South Korea that looked at over 8 million Koreans and looked at the cancer risks after vaccination there. And they corroborated the Italian data and even expanded on it. And they found about 26% increase in overall cancer. But they also found increases across 6 major types of cancer, including gastric, thyroid, colorectal, breast, all sorts of cancers were increased, very rare cancers. So this is an absolute disaster, and it corroborates all the experimental evidence. It's now confirmed that these shots have unleashed a turbo cancer epidemic. The data sets corroborate, and we can now explain it with the gene expression chaos we are seeing as documented in our other studies, as well as the genomic integration we are seeing in stage 4 cancer patients. This is a disaster. This has to be acknowledged immediately.
Well, this is just huge. Yeah. So these studies, this is kind of like the gold standard. When you got 8 million people and you can see what's going on, nothing tops that. Is that right?
Yeah, nothing tops that. Especially when you have two independent data sets corroborating each other. But the key thing is actually, and this was very surprising, the viral vector shots actually had a higher risk of inducing cancer than the mRNA ones. So it was about a 40% increase, 47% increased risk of cancer with AstraZeneca and Janssen. This was unexpected. We were unsure of the carcinogenicity profile of those shots, but now it does appear they are also carcinogenic. The mRNA ones were correlated with a 20% increased risk of cancer. So it appears all vaccine platforms are carcinogenic, all COVID vaccine platforms. So this is very, very bad for the 70% of the population that received these injections.
Yeah, well, just the comfort I would offer people who took those injections is the Japan study that showed excess deaths that came out the last couple months. It did look like the excess deaths peaked about 100 days out. It showed that really gentle curve, which really, I that's a smoking gun to me. Would you agree?
Yeah, I agree. That study, they have millions of vaccine records and all official government data too, by the way. They had volunteers go to the local municipal offices and do an equivalent of a freedom of information request for all of these documents. And yeah, they found this giant spike in delayed fatal adverse events. So what that means is, yeah, months later, the people didn't usually die right after; they died a few months later. And yeah, you'll see that in that giant curve for that Japanese data. And then it kind of did level off a bit, right? There was that giant curve, but regardless, since most of these deaths were occurring months after the injection, um, those go undetectable with being linked to the COVID shot by surveillance systems, right? So most of these deaths, they're not even being recorded or counted because we're only looking at deaths occurring shortly after, not the delayed adverse events.
Wow. Yeah, that was another study with just a ton of people. I think 18 million different vaccinations. So yeah, maybe over 10 million different people. And yeah, and again, comparing the vaccinated versus the unvaccinated, which this data, it seems they've really worked hard to kind of suppress this kind of comparison. Is that right?
Yeah, they've been suppressing it, trying to debunk it, trying to say it's nonsense, it's not published. And so, yeah, they're trying to attack it from all facets, all fronts. But that's what the biopharmaceutical complex does with any study or any data set that shows harms. They will just attack it with their nuclear attack of words, and it doesn't work, right? They might think that they so-called debunk these studies, but nobody believes them anymore because they've lied for such a long period of time. So now the population's waking up. We understand over 56% majority of Americans now, according to a Rasmussen survey, do now believe the COVID shots caused mass death, right? So we know this is happening. And yeah, these so called debunking campaigns by people in the biopharmaceutical complex, by Gates Foundation funded fact checkers, that's all failing miserably.
Right. It just reminds me of big tobacco and what we see in big ag with the pesticides and glyphosate. We catch them red-handed with these front groups and their whole PR. Instead of trying to make the product safe, they spend all this money just on propaganda. And one judge ruled, what's clear from the studies is that they are not concerned with really doing real science. It's just pushing a narrative. So. And I wanted to show this next one here. This was all about infant mortality rates. Were excess deaths were up 50% was the headline number. Is that right?
Yep. Excess deaths are up. It varies between week, but infant excess mortality is increased by a rate of about 50 to 80% since the mass mRNA injection campaign of childbearing age women. So, yeah, you'll see that graph there. And remember, all of this analysis was done by somebody named Ethical Skeptic. He has done a fantastic job at identifying this very serious signal. So, but what this graph here shows is, yeah, the infant mortality rate was declining for 30 years. 30 years. And then, so what happens? We get to 2021, we inject gene transfer platforms into 80% of the population, and then we see a statistically significant inflection point in this decline for 30 years. All of a sudden, it shoots right back up, and it's still shooting up. It's not going down. And so this is very much indicative of transgenerational harms from these shots. It appears there's two facets: teratogenic effects. So when the pregnant mother is vaccinated, the genetic material does transfer through the placenta. That's confirmed in multiple studies now. So that's one route of this harm. But the second one's more disturbing, and that is not teratogenic, but they actually got the vaccine, and then years later they'll have the baby, and the baby will still have this genetic material within him. And this is likely due to genomic integration of the material in some of these mothers, and that is passing off to offspring. The babies are dying of the exact same excess causes as vaccinated adults. So this is very much indicative of these transgenerational mRNA harms. And even states now, they're declaring emergencies. Mississippi just declared a literal public health emergency due to the soaring infant mortality rate. It's an absolute disaster. Hey, Johnny, I think you're muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you.
There you
You
go.
know, I was just saying this reminds me of the Pfizer papers and how they covered reproductive harms, and it seemed like that's just they were so focused on this from the beginning, and at the exclusion of other things that it seems like they would have been more interested in studying. That's something that Naomi Wolf was pointing out. The ACE2 receptor that the spike protein wants to bind to, it just makes it like a magnet for the testes and for the ovaries. And we see the same thing, the same problem in animal studies, right? That the mice, the eggs are depleted this way. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, the eggs of rats. They injected Karman and colleagues out of Turkey, injected rats with mRNA shots, inactivated virus shots out of China, and all of them wiped out the non-renewable egg supply, the what's called primordial follicles, by over 60%. And so these don't regenerate. Once those are gone, they're gone for good. And so you wipe out 60% of those with a battery of mRNA injections. Good luck, having babies in the future. This indicates that function of this mass mRNA program was actually sterilization.
That's so crazy. That's so crazy. So I just want to bring this back up. But this is the Japanese data, the excess deaths. So this blue line, this shows the number of days out from the shot. Kind of peaked at about 100 days, and then about a year later, they were back down to a baseline excess death figure. So that's offers some hope for people who are getting vaccinated. But yeah, look at this, 25 million. This is just a massive, massive study, and the numbers here. About 1% of the people dying. Just a lot more than you would expect. Got
Right.
getting up to five times what the baseline excess death was, 500%. So
Yep. 500% increased mortality rate 2 to 3 months after the injection. So this is very bad. But yeah, you see after about a year, it appears to normalize. We would like to see data past 360 days. I wonder if there'll be another spike. That would remain to be seen. But yeah, it appears lots of the damage, if you were to incur serious adverse events, would occur within that year period. But it takes 5 to 15 years to know the full safety profile of a gene therapy product as defined by the FDA. So it's really going to take us 5 to 15 years to actually know exactly how much damage it's causing and for how long. One thing, though, we do know is we have now confirmed genomic integration in a recent study, and so this is very long lasting. We're identifying plasmid remnants, plasmid fragments from the manufacturing process, spike encoding DNA plasmids in somebody's skin 3 years after his last shot. We're finding circulating spike protein, circulating Wuhan spike protein, indicating it was from the shot 3 years after injection in somebody with multi-system adverse events from these shots. So this stuff's very long lasting, and we have to stay vigilant. We have to find ways to remove this material from vaccinated individuals.
Nick, you said the Wuhan spike protein. Is that you can differentiate because after Omicron it looks a lot different, and then before that it would have been from the. If it looks like it was from before that, then it would be from the vaccine. Is that how it works?
Yeah, so basically, for the very first vaccine, right, we know Wuhan was manipulating all sorts of things, doing gain of function. And so they had the sequence for SARS-CoV-2 and the spike protein. And so Wuhan gave out the sequence to the vaccine makers. And so they literally wrote up on a computer screen the exact sequence from the Wuhan lab to produce this highly toxic manufactured synthetic spike protein, right? So that was very bad. So actually, the Wuhan spike appeared to have been the most dangerous and persistent in the body. So for those who received these shots very early on, that appeared to be the most dangerous form of spike. And then as each iteration went on, they would update the spike sequence in these vaccines to reflect what they claim was circulating, even though there were about a year too late, and so all of these variants were actually far ahead of what they were putting out in these injections. So they weren't even the right ones, anyways. But yeah, they would just update the code on computer screens. They wouldn't test them in humans. They would just test them in rats, and then they just roll them out continuously based on these computer models and simulations. And so it's so bad what they did. It was literally experimental. But yeah, if when you find Wuhan spike in somebody years after the shot, um, that's very worrisome.
That's wild. And I wanted to go back to how you mentioned how, where we've seen more cancers, 40% rather than from the mRNA, and that was with the uh, that was with the virus vector. Was that right? The viral vector with the Janssen shot. What's the difference there for people between the mRNA and how that works for you know uh, supposedly providing immunity?
Yeah, yeah. So the viral vector ones use an adenovirus vector. So basically, some sort of this modify some virus called an adenovirus, and they what the purpose of this virus is to latch onto human cells and install this vaccine DNA that encodes for the spike. So it's basically, just think of the viral vector ones. They're literally injecting you with a modified virus that tells your body to make the spike protein. And then you go to mRNA, that's different. It's not a virus in a sense, it is just lipid nanoparticles that permeate the blood brain barrier, permeate throughout the entire body quite effectively, transfect cells very easily, and install the mRNA, modified mRNA, which is very long lasting, into all of your vital organ systems. So, honestly, both have very dangerous mechanisms. We honestly thought mRNA was more dangerous. But now, as we're kind of uncovering these harms, they both have their fatal flaws. They both have very dangerous issues with them. And now that we're finding out viral vector is carcinogenic, that raises some alarm bells. We got to start looking at that adverse event profile, and we have to remember these viral vector ones were pulled off the market already, right? AstraZeneca, that one's gone. Janssen, that one's gone. At least in America. Europe pulled off AstraZeneca a few months ago. So yeah, that could have been one of the reasons. But regardless, any COVID vaccine is bad and dangerous.
It certainly seems that way, doesn't it? Here, you're working on a study right now concerning what's playing a part in autism. Uh, what did you think about the announcement this last week about Tylenol and vaccines being implicated?
Yeah, yeah. So that's a whole thing to unpack. And we've looked at all the data. We looked at the data they looked at. And so we'll start with Tylenol. So it actually appears the association between Tylenol and autism is what's called confounding by indication, or where Tylenol is not a trigger for autism. It's not a trigger for developmental regression, but it is an amplifier in the risk to developmental regression. So why I say that is because there's 8 studies that found a positive association between prenatal Tylenol use and autism. Not one of these 8 studies mentioned the word vaccine or accounted for vaccination. So that's a giant confounding variable, because a lot of the time, almost most of the time, pregnant mothers take Tylenol is because of a vaccine fever and pain, because they get about 4 vaccines. They get COVID-19, influenza, Tdap, and RSV. All of these list fever on the package insert. So when they get these shots, they get a fever, then they pop the Tylenol, and so we really don't know the true risk there. But they never measure vaccination, and the kids are diagnosed with autism not right when they're born, but ages 2 to 8, after they've received a battery of vaccines. So these studies are not very definitive. Now, Tylenol is very toxic to the liver. you go over the threshold therapeutic dose, you're going to get liver damage and can die, right? So it's not a safe drug. It has a very narrow window of therapeutic efficacy without being dangerous. And so we know that because it does significantly deplete glutathione through your detoxification pathways. That is the well established mechanism of toxicity of this. What's called your your cytochrome P450 enzymes metabolize the Tylenol, the acetaminophen, right? And then once they metabolize it, that actually churns out these toxic byproducts. And then those toxic byproducts reliably bind to your cell's glutathione. And so that'll bring those levels down. And then you also have these battery of vaccine toxins, including, and this is big. There's so many toxins in these childhood vaccines now. So that what is there? First of all, there's aluminum salts, right? We know there's aluminum. We know that's neurotoxic. So you deplete glutathione, boom, that aluminum is going to reach the neurological system, cause damage. Your body won't be able to defend effectively against it. And you also have formaldehyde in a large amount of these vaccines. Formaldehyde is a carcinogen, right? You do not want high levels of formaldehyde in your body. And you have polysorbate 80, right? This is also organ toxic. It's not good for the body. And then you have neomycin in a lot of these vaccines. This is a very neurotoxic and toxic to the ear antibiotic. It's still left in these vaccines in trace amounts, but you inject neomycin. I mean, it's literally well established just how dangerous it is for the human body. So all these toxins are in these vaccines, right? And so you just batter these little babies with all of this garbage. You give them Tylenol, then we see this high fever, we see this febrile seizures, and then we see this documented developmental regression and autism.
It's just crazy, these studies that would really bear out the science are so expensive. I guess some of these gold standard randomized control trials, that the industry says, oh, they clamor for, oh, it's got to be this. Well, they cost tens of millions of dollars, and the only people paying for them are industry. And so there's a huge bias when they do their studies about what data gets cherry picked and how that all comes out. Some of these studies you mentioned for these babies, taking these little tiny poison cocktails, they're watched for 3 days. 3 days, right? We just showed the chart. The peak was 100 days out, right? So why are we for chickens, I read that if you test in the vaccines, they're watching the chickens for a month. And so why are we only watching our babies for 3 days? Just really insane, isn't it?
It's crazy that so we don't even know the safety profile of any of these shots because they follow them for 3 days. Sometimes they'll follow them for a few months, but not very often. And it's never over 6 months, right? That's 6 months is the maximum. So you batter these children with, and usually these studies they only measure one vaccine. Right, one vaccine. How many do these kids get? They get 5 at once, 6 at once. This is common. They get 72 doses by age 18. None of this combination was tested ever, and that's why they're being sued.
Well, and Nick, what comes to mind is we all saw what happened to Maddie DeGray. She volunteered, wanted to help out with the COVID vaccine study, and then she was harmed incredibly. And then they said they threw her out of the study. It wasn't counted what happened to her. They said it was a stomach ache. For whatever reason they excluded her. So and that's when the eyes were on them. We all knew what was going on. So how much more does this happen when they don't have that scrutiny of the public eye?
Right. Yeah, they like to hide things, hide adverse events. They do whatever tricks they can to make their products appear to be safer than they actually are. And this is identified in so many instances, like we saw with the COVID vaccine, with deaths. They had so many deaths, but then they changed the cutoff dates so those deaths don't appear. They do all sorts of tricks, and it's honestly, it should be illegal and it is criminal to falsify data that then leads to approval that's injected into millions of arms, billions of arms, right? So all these criminal activities, there's still been no accountability for this scientific fraud, right? They claim our side is fraudulent. They retract our studies. They say our studies are bad. They retract our preprints, right? They just attack us left and right when they should be the ones being attacked. They should be the ones not attacked in the literal sense, but attacked academically. Their papers should be being retracted, like that big Danish aluminum study that claimed there was no association. That was BS. That was absolute BS. The data was reanalyzed. They had all sorts of statistical tricks, and actually, they found increases in neurodevelopmental disorders with aluminum vaccines. And that paper's still up; it's not retracted. So we're the only side that seems to face this immense attack.
Yeah, I think we just we need people on our side organized in the same way they're organizing. Just using every avenue available to strategically, push for the truth to be borne out and for people to see it and for it to be acted on accordingly. They've learned from big tobacco and big ag. It's just crazy. I wanted to bring up this study that you were referencing earlier. Oh, here, that's the wrong one. Let's see if I can get this. There it is. This must be stopped. A recent landmark study found that Roundup causes over 10 distinct cancers at exposure levels deemed safe by the U.S. Those exposure levels deemed safe. I've learned that these are just what industry wants. So whatever they feel like they need, add a little margin of error for it, and they'll say, well, that's the safe level. That's a little higher than what we expect to be using. Cancers in 10 plus organs: the brain, the blood, the liver, the thyroid, the pancreas, the bone, the skin. Just incredible. And they've had to pay over $12 billion to just Americans who have got just non-Hodgkin's lymphoma from glyphosate. And I think that's just the tip of the iceberg. And they still say that their product doesn't cause cancer. Go figure. I don't get it. How can you, we've got all these studies. We've got, it's really, really hard to win a lawsuit in the courtroom about an environmental toxin this way, because it's all muddled together. You can say, well, how can you prove it was this and not that? But we've won those battles in the courtroom again and again and again, and they're still saying, yeah, no cancer. Go figure. So. Yeah, what do you think? Is glyphosate going to be implicated in causing autism? What do you think there?
Yeah, so well, in our study that's coming out soon that we are finalizing on the possible causes of autism, glyphosate is one of the factors. It is one of the factors. We saw glyphosate use rise, about since the 70s, 80s. It rised quite significantly and exponentially, and also in concert with the increase in autism rates. So it seems both glyphosate and vaccine doses increased at about the same time. And then we see all this autism. So we know the microbiome is critical for some of these autism cases, right? We see in a lot of people who are autistic, their microbiomes are a wreck. They have serious gut issues. And then Dr. Sabine Hassan has identified the an amelioration of autism symptoms when doing fecal transplants, right? Transplanting somebody else's microbiome into this autistic child, they do see significant improvements, right? So we know the gut microbiome plays a critical role. So when you introduce glyphosate in all of our foods, it's in like a huge proportion of our foods now. They spray it everywhere. It's in our homes. It's in our dust. A recent study found that there's so many different pesticides present in the environment now, in our homes, in our urine, everywhere. And so yeah, this is all going to contribute to a destruction of the microbiome and cancerous activity in the body, as documented in that rat study. So yeah, you look at this autism prevalence chart here, you'll see. So autism age 6, right? So that's when they're diagnosed with autism. And you see it, yeah, it just goes up basically also in line with glyphosate. And so this is definitely a plausible factor as well. The causes of autism are multifactorial for sure.
You know, yeah, this glyphosate, it's an antibiotic, right? Like, this was implicated in a Wakefield study that the MMR vaccine may have something to do with causing autism. These kids, they all had real digestive problems. Their microbiome was diminished. It seemed like the MMR vaccine had a role in that. And then, glyphosate, it's an antibiotic, like you mentioned. It's just about everywhere. It gets in the rain in a lot of the country, especially when you're closer to farming, and then we're breathing it in, right? It's in the humidity. It's just really incredible. Again, this is the nutrient chelator as well, which makes it so that our food is so deficient in the minerals we need. It pulls the rust off of metal. That's how powerful it is in this way. So it just binds all these zinc and iron and on everything we need so tightly. And yeah, definitely a carcinogen, definitely an endocrine disruptor. And yeah, autism is it I guess it's been idiopathic for a while. Would that be the right way to describe it? It's kind of a collection of it's just like a lot of inflammation. Is that the best way to describe it?
Yeah, well, it appears that autism in many cases is a post-vaccination encephalitic state. So basically, they have severe neural inflammation, and that induces neurological damage. And so that's what appears to be the case in many of these. And yeah, glyphosate as well, that can cause neural inflammation, right? All of these toxins can cause that and contribute as well. Um, I guess the only thing about glyphosate is that risk is probably the largest prenatally. So, like, especially if the mother consumes a lot of foods loaded with these herbicides, right? That will probably cause neurological damage in the fetus. If they just keep ingesting it. So that's where that risk comes in because we don't see like if you have like a little child that eats a few non-organic cereals, they don't usually immediately regress into autism, right? So it appears, yeah, that risk is largely will be prenatal for inducing autism, but also in combination with all these other factors. So again, it's a very hard question to answer. What exactly is causing it, and when is it causing it? When's the regression occurring? Is it occurring when they're born, or when they're 2, 3 years old? So all of this stuff needs to be identified.
Absolutely. And just like for vaccines, they're also going for liability shields right now for these pesticides. And this isn't an attack on our sovereignty. This is coming from Bayer Monsanto, a German company. It used to be IG Farben, who literally made the Zyklon B gas in World War II. It's coming from ChemChina. Which is literally owned by the Chinese communists. So these are Chinese communists coming for our American rights to stand up for ourselves where it matters most, which are our constitutional rights. That's the First Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, the Seventh Amendment, the right to a trial, the right to get our grievances addressed. So, guys, it's a great time to be heard about Section 453. This is in Congress. So if you'd like it, I hear this is the best way to be heard, better even than an email or a letter. Give them a call, leave a voicemail if it's after hours, tell them no to Section 453. And yeah, we got to stand up for what matters most.
We
When,
do. We do. Yeah, we can't let these giant corporations with that have, conduct that have been implicated in criminal activities many times, being charged massive fines. We can't let them just get away with massive liability shields, poisoning the entire population, right? Those times are over. So, yeah, that has to be stopped. That has to be stopped.
Absolutely, let's preserve rule of law and the right to due process. That's that's what civilization's for, to protect us one from another. We can't let these big guys off the hook. Yeah, thanks so much for all the great work you're doing getting the word out. I know it's you're up against a lot of trolls for the other side, and it's a thankless job sometimes, but we sure do appreciate it.
Thank you, and you as well. Keep up the great work spreading all this awareness. And thank you so much for having me.
All right. Thanks, Nick. Let's talk
Thank you.
soon. All right. Ciao.